The employment register at Borgin and Burke's recorded Tom Riddle's start date as Monday, 15th of September, 1945. Mr. Burke had signed the entry himself, his handwriting cramped but legible. Junior Associate, Acquisitions and Cataloguing. The shop opened at 9 o'clock. Tom arrived at 8:30. The workroom occupied the floor above the shop front. 3 desks stood against the eastern wall, positioned to catch morning light through narrow windows that overlooked Nocturne Alley's cobbled lane. The largest desk belonged to Mr. Burke. The second, smaller but still substantial, had been cleared for Tom's use. The third held stacked ledgers and correspondence awaiting filing. Mr. Borgin's domain, though he rarely used it, preferring to work downstairs among the merchandise. Tom's desk contained 1 bottle of black ink, 2 quills, both new, a blotter, a brass lamp with green glass shade, and 3 blank ledgers bound in black cloth. A printed card, tucked beneath the ink bottle, listed his initial responsibilities in typed text. He read the card twice, then placed it in the desk's top drawer. Mr. Burke arrived at 8:45. He was a thin man, perhaps 60, who moved with careful economy through the cluttered space. He wore the same style of dark robes each day. Tom would learn this within the week, and carried a walking stick he did not strictly require. "Morning," Burke said. He hung his traveling cloak on the hook near the stairs. "You've found everything?" "Yes, sir." "Good. We'll start with inventory verification." Burke crossed to a cabinet and removed a leather portfolio. "System's straightforward. Each object has a catalog number, acquisition date, and provenance notes. Your job is matching physical items to written records and flagging discrepancies." He opened the portfolio, revealing a printed inventory list dated 1943. Columns of text filled both sides of the page. Item descriptions, catalog numbers, shelf locations, purchase prices. "We're 2 years behind," Burke said. "War disrupted everything. Acquisitions continued, but documentation suffered. You'll be correcting that." Tom took the portfolio. The list contained perhaps 200 entries. He scanned the first page. Silver chalice, possibly 16th century. Moderate tarnish. Catalogue, number 2847. Shelf 3B. Carved 1 box. Dragon motif. Damaged hinge. Catalogue, number 2851. Shelf 3B. Crystal file set, 6 pieces, 1 cracked. Catalogue, number 5853. "I'll need access to the storage areas," Tom said. "Naturally. 3rd floor holds overflow stock, older items waiting for buyers or further research. You'll spend most of your time there initially." Burke retrieved a key ring from his desk. "This opens the 3rd floor workroom and the archive cabinet. Don't lose them." The keys were iron, heavy, marked with stamped numbers. Tom pocketed them. "One more thing," Burke said. He drew a thin book from inside his robes and placed it on Tom's desk. The cover read, "Standard Cataloguing, Procedures for Magical Antiquities. Ministry-approved format. 1937 edition. Follow this exactly. Ministry inspectors review our records every 18 months. Everything must match their specifications." Tom opened the book. Dense text explained classification systems, condition rating scales, provenance documentation requirements. The format was rigid. Each entry required specific information in a specific order. "Understood," Tom said. Burke nodded. "Questions?" "When do acquisition appointments typically occur?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually. Sometimes Saturdays if the client requires discretion. You'll accompany me once you've demonstrated competence with the cataloguing work." Burke checked his pocket watch. I'm opening the shop. Begin with shelf 3A on the 3rd floor. Work systematically. Note anything requiring repair or re-evaluation. He descended the stairs. Tom heard the front door unlock, then Burke's voice greeting someone who'd been waiting outside. Tom climbed to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor workroom was larger than the space below, with higher ceilings and better light. Shelves lined 3 walls, each labeled with painted letters and numbers. A long table occupied the center of the room, its surface scarred from decades of use. Dust hung in the air, visible in the sunlight streaming through the western windows. Tom set the portfolio on the table and surveyed the room. The shelves held hundreds of objects, boxes, wrapped bundles, items covered with cloth, others sitting exposed. Some organization was evident, similar objects grouped together, but no immediately visible system. He returned to the portfolio and read the first entry again. Silver chalice, possibly 16th century, moderate tarnish. Catalogue, DAC number 2N847. Shelf 3B. Shelf 3B stood against the northern wall. Tom walked the length of it, examining each object. The chalice sat on the 4th shelf from the floor, wrapped in grey cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. The chalice matched. The description: silver, tarnished. No markings visible on the exterior. Tom tilted it, checking the base. Hallmarks there, partially obscured. A maker's mark and what might be a date. He carried it to the table and lit the lamp. Under better light, the date resolved: 1587. The maker's mark remained unclear, possibly continental. Tom noted this in the margin of the inventory list, then consulted the cataloguing manual. According to procedure, he needed catalogue number verification, condition assessment using the standard scale, dimensions recorded in inches, weight if precision scales were available, material composition confirmed, origin estimated with confidence level, and any magical properties noted. The shop kept precision scales on the 2nd floor. Tom descended, retrieved them, and returned. The chalice weighed 11 ounces. Tom recorded this, then measured. Height 4 1/2 inches, diameter 3 1/4 inches at the rim. He examined it for magical residue using the detection method Burke had mentioned during his interview, running his wand lengthwise along the object's surface and noting any warmth or resistance. Nothing. The chalice was simply old silver. Tom completed the entry in his ledger, matching the ministry-approved format exactly. The process had taken 12 minutes. 200 entries remained on the list. He continued. By midday, Tom had processed 18 items. The work required precision, but not difficulty. Most objects matched their descriptions adequately. 3 showed condition deterioration since their original cataloguing. A jewelry box with worsening wood rot, a set of pewter goblets developing new corrosion, a leather manuscript case whose stitching had separated. Tom noted each discrepancy along with recommendations. The jewelry box required preservation charms. The goblets needed professional cleaning. The manuscript case needed repair or replacement. At 12:30, Burke appeared at the top of the stairs. Break for lunch. There's a tea shop 2 doors down. Decent sandwiches, quick service. Back by 1 o'clock. Tom nodded and descended with him. The tea shop was narrow and crowded, serving customers who worked in nocturne alleys' various establishments. Tom ordered bread and cheese, then found space at a corner table. He ate efficiently while reviewing his morning's notes. The pattern was becoming clear. Borgin and Burke's inventory system functioned adequately for ordinary business. But gaps existed. Some objects had minimal provenance information. Others showed acquisition dates without corresponding purchase records. A few items on the list appeared to be missing entirely from the shelves. These gaps represented opportunity. Knowledge gaps were exploitable gaps. Tom finished his lunch and returned to the shop at 5 minutes before 1. The afternoon proceeded like the morning. Tom worked through shelf 3B, then began shelf 3C. The objects varied: decorative pieces, potentially cursed items kept for study, old potion equipment, manuscript fragments in protective cases. At 3:30, Berg climbed to the 3rd floor again. He carried a wooden box, roughly 12 inches square, secured with a corroded brass clasp. "New acquisition," Berg said, placing the box on the table. "Came in this morning. Evaluate it and prepare a preliminary catalogue entry." Tom set aside his current work. "What's known about it?" "Very little. Estate sale up in Yorkshire. House clearance after the owner died. Elderly wizard, no heirs. Auctioneers sold the contents in lots. I bought 3 boxes of miscellaneous items. This was in the 2nd box." Berg unclasped the box and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a small bronze mirror. The frame showed verdigris patina. The mirror's surface was darkened, almost black, barely reflective. "Previous owner's name?" Tom asked. "Caro. Edric Caro. Family's old, mostly died out. This branch ended with him." Tom recognized the name. Pure blood, probably related to the main Caro line that had produced several notable dark wizards. "Permission to handle it?" "Carefully." Tom lifted the mirror from its box. The bronze was cold, heavier than expected. He examined the frame. Simple geometric patterns, no inscriptions, no obvious magical marks. The backing was solid bronze, seamlessly joined to the frame. He performed the standard detection test, running his wand along the mirror's edge. Immediate resistance. The wand warmed perceptibly in his hand. Something active remained in this object. "Magical properties present," Tom said. "Defensive or contained, not immediately hostile." Berg nodded. "Likely explanation?" Tom considered. "Scrying mirror, possibly, or a communication device. The darkening suggests either age or deliberate concealment of its reflective function. Could be cursed. Possible, though the magic feels structured, not corrupted." Tom set the mirror on the table. "Would require further testing to confirm function." "Not your responsibility yet," Berg said. "Just catalogue what's observable and flag it for my review." He left Tom to the work. Tom prepared the catalogue entry according to procedure: object type, dimensions, material, condition, magical presence confirmed, provenance notes including the Caro name and estate sale origin. He assigned it a temporary catalogue number, 12104, and noted the date. Then he opened the desk drawer and removed a second notebook, smaller, bound in black leather, unmarked. This one wasn't provided by the shop. In this notebook, Tom wrote, "Bronze scrying mirror, Caro family origin. Active magic, containment type. Check genealogical records for Edric Caro, connections to main line. Verify if other Caro items appeared in same estate sale. Similar objects potentially available from auction house." He closed the private notebook and returned it to the drawer beneath the shop ledgers. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Tom worked systematically through the inventory list, completing approximately 20 entries per day. His catalogue entries were precise, formatted correctly, free from errors. Berg reviewed them weekly and found nothing requiring correction. Meanwhile, the private notebook grew. Each object Tom catalogued received 2 treatments: the official entry, compliant and complete, and a personal assessment noting gaps, questions, possibilities. Objects with uncertain provenance went into the private record with research notes. Items showing unusual magical properties received additional documentation, not just what was observable, but what might be learned through further investigation. When Burke began taking Tom on acquisition appointments in October, the system expanded. The official purpose was evaluation. Tom learned to assess objects quickly, identify forgeries, estimate fair purchase prices. But each visit also provided information Burke didn't specifically request. Tom noted which families kept organized archives versus chaotic storage, which elderly witches and wizards responded well to flattery versus academic interest, which households employed security measures beyond basic locking charms, which families possessed libraries worth future attention. All of this went into the private notebook. By December, Tom had completed the 1943 inventory verification. Burke assigned him the 1944 list, another 200 entries, and increased his responsibilities to include preliminary valuations for certain incoming items. The shop's rhythm became familiar. Morning cataloguing work, afternoon appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays, occasional Saturday meetings with clients who preferred discretion. Tom learned the trade's technical aspects quickly. He learned its social aspects even faster. People wanted to talk about their family heirlooms. They wanted their objects to be important, valuable, historically significant. Tom learned to listen carefully, express appropriate interest, and remember everything mentioned. One appointment in particular proved instructive. Mrs. Hepzibah Smith lived in a large house near Hampstead Heath, maintained by a house elf she'd named Hokey. Burke had arranged the appointment for a Thursday in late November. The purpose: evaluation of several items Mrs. Smith wished to sell following her husband's recent death. The drawing room where she received them contained enough artifacts to stock a small museum. Portraits lined the walls. Display cases held jewelry, decorative objects, old books. A cabinet of particular prominence stood near the fireplace, its glass doors revealing items arranged on velvet cloth. Mrs. Smith was perhaps 70, dressed in elaborate robes that had been fashionable 30 years prior. She gestured them to seats and immediately began talking. "My husband's family collected extensively," she said. 3 centuries of acquisitions. I'm retaining the finest pieces, naturally, but some items deserve proper placement with knowledgeable collectors. Burke produced his standard evaluation forms. "Perhaps you could show us the pieces you're considering selling?" "Of course." Mrs. Smith rose and crossed to a smaller cabinet. "These items here, various jewelry, some silver pieces, a few books, all respectable, all documented." Tom followed Burke's lead, examining each object systematically. Standard procedure: inspect, note condition, estimate age and origin, provide preliminary valuation. Burke handled the financial discussion while Tom recorded details. The jewelry was competent but unremarkable. Victorian-era pieces, well made but common. The silver showed quality craftsmanship. The books were interesting. 2 grimoires, dated to the 1600s, possibly valuable to the right buyer. "These are quite acceptable," Burke said. "I can offer—" "Oh, but you haven't seen the truly special pieces," Mrs. Smith interrupted. She moved to the prominent cabinet near the fireplace. These, of course, are not for sale. I'm simply showing you so you understand my family's caliber of collecting." She opened the cabinet with obvious pride. Inside, among several objects, sat two items of immediate interest: a small golden cup with ornate handles and a heavy locket on a gold chain. Tom maintained his expression carefully neutral. "Helga Hufflepuff's cup," Mrs. Smith announced, touching the cup with one finger. "Authenticated by 3 independent experts. And here, Salazar Slytherin's locket, both acquired by my husband's grandfather through entirely legitimate channels." Burke leaned forward slightly. "Remarkable. The provenance documentation must be extraordinary." "Naturally. Complete records, from original acquisition forward." Mrs. Smith closed the cabinet. "As I said, not for sale. But I wanted you to understand the standards I maintain." They completed the appointment professionally. Burke made an offer for the jewelry and books. Mrs. Smith accepted. Arrangements were made for item transfer and payment. In the cab returning to the shop, Burke said, "She's showing off." "Obviously," Tom replied. "The founder artifacts are likely authentic. Too much risk in claiming otherwise. But her security is minimal." Burke gazed out the window. "Not our concern, naturally. We've completed our business." "Naturally," Tom said. That evening, in his private notebook, Tom wrote, "Hepzibah Smith, Hufflepuff cup and Slytherin locket confirmed. Cabinet location: drawing room, east wall, near fireplace. Single house elf security. Provenance records claimed complete. Further information required: acquisition history, family genealogy, house ward assessment." He underlined the entry twice. The system was working. The appointments file occupied the bottom drawer of Burke's desk. Each potential acquisition received a folder: client correspondence, property details, preliminary item descriptions, travel arrangements. By January 1946, Tom had access to this drawer and the responsibility of preparing appointment summaries. The pattern was consistent. Pure-blood families facing financial decline contacted the shop discreetly. Burke arranged visits, evaluated their heirlooms, made offers. Most families wanted privacy. No public auctions, no ministry records of asset sales, no acknowledgement that old money had run out. Tom's official role was technical assessment. His actual education was more comprehensive. The first significant estate visit occurred on a Tuesday in February. The Yaxley family maintained property in Cornwall, a manor house overlooking the coast. Correspondence indicated the family's last remaining member, Octavia Yaxley, aged 83, required funds for property maintenance and had several items of possible interest. Burke and Tom travelled by flu to Bodmin, then hired a ministry-approved carriage for the remaining journey. The roads were narrow, winding through bare winter landscape. The Yaxley manor appeared after an hour's travel, grey stone, 3 stories, showing obvious neglect. Roof tiles missing, windows with cracked panes, grounds overgrown. A house elf answered Burke's knock. Ancient, even by house elf standards, wearing a pillowcase marked with the Yaxley crest. "Mistress Yaxley is expecting you," the elf said. "Please follow." The entrance hall showed faded grandeur, portraits with darkened varnish, furniture covered in dust cloths, a chandelier missing half its crystals. The elf led them to a drawing room where a fire struggled against the room's chill. Octavia Yaxley sat near the fire, wrapped in heavy robes. Her hands trembled slightly, age, not fear. She gestured to chairs without rising. "Mr. Burke, you received my letter." "Yes, madam." Burke settled into the offered seat. Tom remained standing until Burke indicated he should sit. You mentioned several pieces requiring evaluation. Family items, no longer needed. Her voice was steady despite her physical frailty. I'm the last Yaxley. The property passes to a cousin when I die, someone who married a Muggle-born and thinks the old ways are outdated. She'll sell everything to the highest bidder without understanding what any of it means. Burke produced parchment and quill. Perhaps you could show us what you're offering. Mrs. Yaxley rang a small bell. The house elf reappeared. Bring the items from the library, she instructed, the ones we discussed. While the elf departed, Mrs. Yaxley studied Tom directly for the first time. You're young for this work. I'm thorough, Tom replied. Burke wouldn't bring someone incompetent. But being thorough with dark objects requires more than diligence. It requires understanding what they were meant to do, not just what they look like now. The elf returned, carrying a wooden tray. 3 objects sat on it: a silver dagger with a serpent-carved handle, a small wooden box with bronze fittings, and a crystal sphere roughly the size of a snitch. Burke examined each item using standard procedure. Tom assisted, noting details while Burke conducted preliminary assessments. The dagger, ceremonial rather than practical, probably 18th century, mild curse residue, suggesting it had been used for blood magic rituals. The box, protective enchantments still active, contents unknown but likely documents, or small artifacts. The sphere, divination tool, possibly a scrying device, magic dormant but not depleted. Fair craftsmanship, Burke said. The dagger has modest collector value. The box might bring more if we can open it safely. The sphere, divination items are difficult to price without testing functionality. There's a story about the sphere, Mrs. Yaxley said. My grandfather acquired it from the Knott family in 1847. They claimed it had belonged to a seer who served the Wizengamot during the 17th century. It allegedly showed true visions, but demanded payment. A day of the user's life for each question answered. Tom looked up from his notes. Was that verified? Who can verify such things? The Knotts believed it. They sold it after their youngest son used it 3 times and died of rapid aging within a week. Mrs. Yaxley's expression remained neutral. My grandfather tested it once, saw something that frightened him badly enough to lock it away, and forbade anyone from touching it again. Burke set the sphere down carefully. We'd need to account for that history in any sale. Buyers are cautious about cursed divination tools. It's not cursed, it simply has a price. Mrs. Yaxley paused. There's a difference. The conversation continued. Burke made preliminary offers. Mrs. Yaxley negotiated with practiced skill. She needed money but refused to be cheated. They settled on terms. Burke would take the items for evaluation and return within a week with final offers. As the house elf showed them to the door, Mrs. Yaxley called after them. Young man. Tom turned. If you're thorough, as you claim, you'll research the Yaxley library records before you leave Cornwall. My family kept detailed documentation. The Bodmin Magical Archive has copies. We donated them after the last fire nearly destroyed our collection. She smiled thinly. Just so you understand what you're handling properly. The Bodmin Magical Archive occupied 3 rooms above the village's owl post office. The clerk, an elderly wizard named Pembroke, maintained the records with obsessive precision. He showed Tom to the Yaxley collection without hesitation. Burke had paid for access years ago, establishing the shop's credentials. The collection filled 2 shelves: family genealogy, property records, acquisition documentation for various magical items, correspondence dating back 2 centuries. Tom worked systematically. He located the entry for the crystal sphere, purchased from the Knott family in 1847 for $150 and services rendered. The services weren't specified. Attached correspondence included a letter from Thaddeus Knott warning that the device has shown true sight but extracts terrible cost. Recommend disposal or secure storage. Further documentation revealed the Yaxley grandfather's single use of the sphere. A diary entry dated 1849 recorded, "Asked the sphere about the ministry's planned blood status legislation. Saw visions of war, deaths, families destroyed. Felt myself age as the visions continued. When I closed the session, 3 days had passed. From my perception, though others said I'd sat motionless for only minutes. Mirror showed new grey hair, new lines. Wife confirms visible aging. Device works, but cannot be used safely. Sealing it permanently." Tom copied the relevant passages into his notebook, the official one. Then he opened his private notebook and wrote additional observations. Sphere trades lifetime for information. Mechanism unclear, but consistent. Knott family records might contain original acquisition details. Yaxley documentation suggests other families possess similar devices. Cross-reference divination tools in Burke's inventory. Check for similar payment-based mechanics. He continued through the archive for another hour, examining other Yaxley acquisitions. The family had purchased extensively from estate sales and private collectors. Most items were mundane, decorative objects, standard magical tools, but several showed interesting origins. One notation caught particular attention, a reference to Slytherin artifacts examined but not purchased, 1832. The details indicated the Yaxley family had been offered items allegedly connected to Salazar Slytherin, but declined after authentication proved inconclusive. Tom noted this carefully. The Slytherin locket at Hepzibah Smith's house was authenticated. Understanding which other claimed Slytherin artifacts existed and where authentication had failed provided useful context. The pattern repeated through spring and early summer. Burke's appointment schedule remained consistent, 2 or 3 estate visits per month, each following similar structure. Tom's role expanded from simple note-taking to preliminary research and post-visit documentation. April brought a visit to the Selwyn family property in Devon. The house was smaller than the Yaxley estate, but better maintained. Marcus Selwyn, aged 70, had outlived his children and wanted to liquidate certain items before entering long-term care at St. Mungo's. The objects offered were predictable: jewelry, silverware, decorative pieces. But during the evaluation, Selwyn mentioned his family's library. "Kept since the 1600s, he said. "Not selling the books. They're going to the ministry archives per my will, but thought you should know what kind of family you're dealing with. We kept records." Burke expressed polite interest. Selwyn showed them to the library. 2 rooms filled with books, manuscripts, correspondence files, organized by decade. "My great-great-grandfather corresponded with Gellert, Grindelwald's grandfather," Selwyn said, pulling a file from a shelf. "Before all that unpleasantness, naturally, academic discussion about magical theory. Nothing dangerous." Tom examined the correspondence carefully, while Burke finalized the transaction for the offered items. The letters discussed elemental magic theory, transformation permanence, and, briefly, the theoretical properties of the Deathly Hallows. One letter, dated 1887, included this passage. Regarding your question about the Elder Wand's core composition, I've examined the historical records available through the Department of Mysteries archives. Most sources agree the wand's core is thestral tail hair, suggesting death-related magic as its foundation. However, 3 independent accounts claim the wand predates thestral domestication, which creates chronological impossibility unless the wand's creation involved wild thestrals, unlikely given their rarity, or the wand's true origin differs from Beadle's tale. Tom memorized the passage. Later, in the carriage returning to the Flue Point, he transcribed it into his private notebook. Burke noticed, taking extensive notes? The Selwyn family history provides useful context for the items we're purchasing. Understanding collector motivations helps with future acquisitions. True enough. Burke gazed out the window. Though don't get distracted by academic curiosities. We're merchants, not historians. Of course. But that evening, Tom added to his private notes, Elder Wand, core composition disputed. Check Department of Mysteries accessible records. Cross-reference thestral domestication timeline. Beadle's tale possibly simplified or corrupted. Original source material. June brought the most significant visit, the Burke family estate in Wales. A distant cousin of Mr. Burke had died, leaving property to be divided among several heirs. Mr. Burke had first selection of magical items per family agreement. The house was large, well-maintained, occupied by the deceased's widow until the inheritance settled. She was a sharp-eyed woman named Elspeth Burke, who clearly resented the family agreement, but honored it legally. Take what you're entitled to, she told Burke. The sooner this is finished, the sooner I can sell the property and move somewhere civilized. The collection was extensive. 3 generations of acquisitions filled a dedicated storage wing. Furniture, artwork, books, magical instruments, protective items, curiosities from around the world. Burke moved through the collection methodically, selecting items with clear resale value. Tom accompanied him, recording selections and noting condition. Then Burke paused at a locked cabinet. This was my cousin's private collection, he said. Items he kept separate from the general holdings. Elspeth Burke provided the key without comment. Inside the cabinet, documents mostly, but also 3 objects of immediate interest. A ring with a cracked black stone, a small glass vial containing dark liquid, and a leather journal bound with copper clasps. Burke examined the ring first. Gaunt family piece. My cousin purchased it from Caractacus Burke. No relation, different family entirely. Sometime in the 1930s, supposedly connected to Salazar Slytherin's line, though the authentication was disputed. Tom kept his expression neutral. May I examine it? Burke handed it over. The ring was heavy, old gold, the stone cracked through the center. Tom performed standard magical detection. Immediate, powerful response. Something layered, complex, possibly multiple enchantments overlapping. Strong magic present, Tom said. Degraded, but not depleted. Likely a family protection charm or inheritance marker. Pure blood families use them to verify bloodline legitimacy. Burke took the ring back and set it aside. Difficult to sell. The Gaunt family is essentially extinct, and the magic's too specific to be useful to other families. He moved to the vial next. Dark, liquid, viscous, no label. Burke unstoppered it carefully and sniffed. Preserved blood, he said. Probably connected to blood magic rituals. No practical value now. The journal was last. Burke opened it, scanned a few pages, and handed it to Tom. Inventory records from a private collector might contain useful information about where certain items ended up. Tom read carefully. The journal documented acquisitions from the 1920s through early 1930s. Objects purchased, their sources, prices paid, subsequent sales to other collectors. The entries were detailed. Item descriptions, historical context, provenance chains, buyer information. One entry, dated 1927, read, "Silver cup, authenticated as Helga Hufflepuff's personal drinking vessel. Purchased from estate sale of the Drakemore family, $500. Authenticated by Gringotts Metalwork Analysis and Department of Mysteries Historical Verification. Resold to Edmund Smith, 1928, $800. Tom kept reading, expression unchanged, memorizing every word. Another entry, 1931, consulted with Grigorovich Wandmaker regarding Elder Wand location. He claims wand stolen from his shop circa 1899 by unknown thief. Trail went cold afterward. Grigorovich bitter about the loss, unlikely to cooperate with further inquiries. Tom continued through the journal methodically. When he finished, Burke said, "Anything useful?" The collector had extensive contacts. Several items in our current inventory appear in these records with their original purchase prices. We're undervaluing some pieces based on this information. Show me. Tom pointed out 3 entries. Burke examined them, nodded, and revised his internal pricing estimates. Good work. That's exactly the kind of detail that improves our margins. He closed the journal. I'm taking this for the shop records. The ring too, though we may not be able to sell it. The vial can stay. Elspeth won't want it either. They completed the inventory selection and departed by mid-afternoon. That evening, Tom opened his private notebook and wrote extensively. The gaunt ring details, family name, Slytherin connection, complex layered magic, the journal's documentation of the Hufflepuff Cup's path from Drakemore family to Edmund Smith, to, presumably, Hepzibah Smith. The Elder Wand reference, placing it in Grigorovich's possession until 1899. He added cross-references, questions, research priorities. The pattern was becoming clearer. Objects connected to Hogwarts founders appeared regularly in pure blood estate sales. Authentication was possible, but inconsistent. Provenance chains could be traced through collector networks and family records. The knowledge was accumulating systematically, exactly as intended. By August, Tom had accompanied Burke on 14 estate visits. His private notebook contained detailed documentation, family names, property locations, security arrangements, archive accessibility, house elf protocols, ward configurations, collector networks, object, provenance chains. The official catalogue work continued. Tom maintained his assigned responsibilities precisely, but the real value was the information Burke never knew he was providing. When families talked about their heirlooms, they talked about history, where objects came from, who owned them previously, what they were meant to do, why they mattered. They mentioned other families, other collectors, other estates with similar items. Tom listened carefully, asked appropriate questions, and remembered everything. The system worked because it appeared routine. Burke saw a diligent employee learning the antique trade. Clients saw a respectful young man showing proper interest in their family heritage. No one questioned why Tom occasionally requested permission to examine family archives or ask detailed questions about object origins. By the time September arrived, marking Tom's first full year at Borgin and Burke's, the private notebook contained more valuable information than any catalogue the shop maintained, and Tom had barely begun. The formal request for extended leave crossed Burke's desk in mid-March 1948. Tom had prepared the documentation carefully. 3 months' absence, research purposes, unpaid leave with position held for his return. The request letter cited academic investigation of artifact authentication methodologies and included references to 3 specific libraries, Edinburgh, Paris, and Alexandria, where specialized collections might improve his valuation expertise. Burke read the request twice, then looked up. 3 months is considerable time. The research requires it. Many authentication disputes arise from incomplete historical documentation. Access to institutional archives would provide comparative data for more accurate assessments. Benefiting the shop how, specifically? Tom had prepared for this. Current inventory includes 12 items with disputed provenance. 3 have remained unsold for over 2 years because buyers question their authenticity. Resolving these questions increases their value substantially. Additionally, understanding authentication methodologies used by other dealers prevents us from purchasing questionable items that later prove unsellable. Burke considered this. The disputed items were indeed problematic. Capital tied up in merchandise that wouldn't move. You'd be conducting this research independently. Yes, the libraries require individual applications. I've already initiated contact with their archive departments. Tom placed 3 letters on the desk, responses from each institution confirming preliminary approval for researcher access. Burke examined the letters. All properly formatted, all from legitimate institutions, all confirming that Mr. Riddle's proposed research fell within their collection scope. The timing? Burke asked. April through June. Shop activity typically decreases during those months as clients focus on property maintenance and summer planning rather than acquisitions. This was accurate. Burke nodded slowly. You'd return in July? First week of July at the latest. And you're not seeking paid leave? The research serves my professional development primarily. Requesting shop funding would be inappropriate. Burke appreciated this reasoning. Very well. Submit formal documentation to be filed with the employment records. Your position remains available on your return, assuming you actually return. I will. Tom submitted the documentation that afternoon. 2 weeks later, on the 1st of April, he departed London by Port Key to Edinburgh. The Edinburgh Magical Research Library occupied a converted townhouse near the University District. 4 stories, narrow staircases, rooms repurposed as reading areas and storage. The collection focused on Scottish magical history, but the restricted section contained materials acquired from dissolved institutions across Britain, including items from several defunct pureblood family libraries. Tom's application had specified interest in artifact authentication documentation, particularly items connected to pre-1500 magical practitioners. The head librarian, a stern witch named Mrs. Kilpatrick, had approved access to the general restricted collection, but required supervision for certain materials. Research hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday, she explained during Tom's orientation. Materials must be requested in writing each morning. No removing items from the reading room. No copying charms permitted. Hand transcription only. Questions about specific documents should be directed to the duty archivist. Tom nodded. Understood. We've had issues with private researchers in the past. Damaged materials, unauthorized copying, theft attempts. Your access will be revoked immediately if any rules are violated. I appreciate the clarity. Mrs. Kilpatrick studied him briefly, then provided the restricted reading room key. You're younger than most researchers we accommodate. I work quickly. We'll see. The restricted reading room was small. 2 desks, 1 window, shelves behind locked glass doors. Tom submitted his first materials request that morning, catalogue records for dissolved family libraries, specifically those mentioning founder-related artifacts. The archivist delivered 3 boxes of documents by mid-morning. Tom worked systematically. The boxes contained acquisition records, appraisal documents, and correspondence related to library dissolutions from the 1800s through early 1900s. Most material was mundane: standard books, common magical texts, household records, but several files referenced notable items. One particularly useful file documented the 1887 dissolution of the Ravenclaw descendant library. The family line had ended without heirs, and the collection had been assessed for ministry acquisition. The appraisal listed 43 books on advanced charms theory, 16 manuscripts regarding transfiguration applications, 8 journals attributed to Rowena Ravenclaw herself, authentication disputed, 1 silver diadem, authenticity unconfirmed, stylistically consistent with 11th century craftsmanship, magical properties dormant but present. The diadem's subsequent location wasn't specified. Tom noted this and continued reading. By the end of his first week, he had processed 12 boxes of documents. His official research notebook, the one Mrs. Kilpatrick occasionally reviewed, contained careful transcriptions of authentication methodologies, provenance documentation standards, and appraisal procedures. His private notebook, kept in his lodgings and never brought to the library, contained different information: specific artifact locations, family connection networks, gaps in ministry acquisition records, references to items that had disappeared during estate dissolutions. The second week, Tom requested access to materials related to the Deathly Hallows. Mrs. Kilpatrick hesitated. That's somewhat outside your stated research focus. The Hallows are relevant to authentication methodology. Multiple items claimed as Deathly Hallows appear in historical records. Understanding how such claims were evaluated provides useful comparative data. This reasoning satisfied her. She approved access to 3 specific collections: Beadle Scholarship Analysis, Medieval Wand-Making Documentation, and Department of Mysteries declassified reports on legendary artifacts. The Beadle Scholarship was mostly academic: literary analysis, folklore comparison, symbolic interpretation. Tom skimmed it quickly. The wand-making documentation was more useful: detailed records of notable wands, their makers, their woods and cores, their documented abilities. One entry, dated 1762, described an elder wand examined by the master wand-maker, Gerbold Ollivander. Wood confirmed as elder, core composition unknown, resist standard analysis. Owner, name withheld per. Ministry request, demonstrated exceptional casting ability, but died under violent circumstances shortly after examination. Wand subsequently disappeared from ministry custody. Investigation inconclusive. Tom transcribed this carefully. The Department of Mysteries reports were heavily redacted but still informative. One 1921 report discussed objects of legendary status requiring investigation. The report listed the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility, noting, Elder Wand location unknown, last reliably documented in Eastern Europe circa 1899. Resurrection Stone, no confirmed sightings since 1756, likely lost or destroyed. Invisibility Cloak, multiple items claimed as the cloak, none displaying consistent properties across generations as legend suggests. Conclusion: Hallows likely exist as exceptional but non-supernatural objects whose capabilities have been exaggerated through retelling. Tom noted the 1899 date, matching the journal entry from Burke's Cousin's collection about Grigorovich. Paris required different protocols. The Bibliothèque Arcane occupied a section of the Parisian magical quarter, accessible only to credentialed researchers. Tom's application emphasized his work with Borgin and Burke's and his interest in continental approaches to artifact preservation and documentation. The application process took 3 weeks. Tom spent the intervening time in Paris examining public collections, visiting magical antiquarian shops, and establishing contacts among book dealers who might provide useful information. The Bibliothèque approved his access in early May. Unlike Edinburgh's intimate reading rooms, the Bibliothèque was vast. 3 floors, multiple wings, reading areas accommodating dozens of researchers simultaneously. The collections included materials from across Europe, French, German, Italian, Spanish magical documentation spanning centuries. The librarian who processed Tom's credentials was a young wizard named Dubois, who spoke excellent English. Your interest area: authentication practices for medieval and early modern magical artifacts, particularly items connected to notable practitioners or institutions. Dubois nodded. We have extensive materials. I'd recommend starting with the Beaumont collection, 18th century documentation of artifact appraisals across France. Very thorough provenance records. Tom spent his first week with the Beaumont collection. The documents revealed a sophisticated authentication network. Appraisers traveled between estates, compared items, shared findings, established standards. One appraiser, Marcel Beaumont, had specialized in items allegedly connected to famous wizards. His 1743 report on Merlin-attributed artifacts was particularly instructive. Beaumont had examined 17 different objects claimed as Merlin's possessions. He'd authenticated 2, a star fragment and a carved stone, while conclusively disproving the other 15. His methodology was rigorous. Material analysis, magical signature comparison, historical timeline verification, stylistic consistency assessment. Tom transcribed Beaumont's methodology completely. The private notebook received additional notation. Authentication requires multiple verification methods. Single source claims insufficient. Historical timeline consistency critical. Many forgeries fail here. The second week, Tom requested materials on Grindelwald family history. The librarian raised an eyebrow but approved the request. The materials were historical, not restricted. The Grindelwald family documents included genealogies, property records, and correspondence. One particularly interesting file contained letters between Gellert, Grindelwald's grandfather, and various European scholars during the 1880s. These letters discussed magical theory extensively. Several mentioned the Deathly Hallows, not as children's tales, but as legitimate historical artifacts worth serious study. One letter, dated 1883, stated, "Your skepticism regarding the Hallows is unwarranted. I've examined documentation from the Peveril family archives, admittedly fragmentary, but consistent across multiple independent sources. The three objects existed. Whether they possess the supernatural qualities attributed to them remains debatable, but their existence is historically supportable." Tom copied this and continued through the correspondence. Another letter, 1885, mentioned, "The Elder One's tracking is feasible through violent death records. Each owner's death creates documentation, ministry records, local histories, witness accounts. Someone methodical could construct a timeline." Tom spent the next 3 days in the Bibliothèque's crime and death record section, examining French ministry documentation of violent magical deaths from 1700 through 1900. The records were incomplete. Many deaths went undocumented. Many documents had been lost or destroyed, but patterns emerged. Certain deaths showed characteristics suggesting exceptional magical combat, extensive property damage, multiple witness accounts of extraordinary casting, delayed ministry response suggesting powerful magical interference. Tom cross-referenced these with historical Wanamaker records, looking for connections. He found 3 possibles: deaths in 1782, 1831, and 1887, where circumstances suggested involvement of an unusually powerful wand. The 1887 case was most detailed. A wizard named Baptiste Renard, known for collecting rare wands, had died in a violent confrontation. His collection had been looted afterward, specific items taken while others remained untouched. Tom noted this in both notebooks. Official version. Example of how crime records assist in tracking artifact movement. Private version. Elder wand, possibly in France, until 1887. Renard's killer likely took it. Check Eastern European records next. Matches Department of Mysteries timeline. Alexandria was most difficult to access. The Library of Magical Antiquities required not just application approval, but sponsorship from a recognized magical institution. Tom had prepared for this by securing a letter from Borgin and Bergs stating that his research served significant commercial and scholarly purposes, benefiting the broader understanding of artifact authentication. The letter, combined with Tom's carefully documented research in Edinburgh and Paris, satisfied the Alexandria administrators. Access was granted for June. The Alexandria Library specialized in ancient magical texts, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and early medieval materials. The collection included papyri, scrolls, codices, and later manuscripts, many discussing magical practices that predated modern European traditions. Tom's stated research interest: early methodologies for imbuing objects with permanent magical properties. The head of research, Dr. Hassan, was an elderly Egyptian wizard who'd spent 50 years studying ancient magic. He reviewed Tom's application and previous research documentation with clear interest. "You're investigating practical applications, not just theory?" "Yes." "Understanding how ancient practitioners created lasting enchantments informs authentication of items claiming ancient origin." Dr. Hassan nodded. "Most European researchers focus on combat magic or transformation theory. Object enchantment receives less attention, though it's foundational to much of modern magical practice." He provided Tom access to the Greek and Roman collections, specifically texts discussing object consecration, curse installation, and property transference between objects and living beings. Tom spent 2 weeks reading methodically through materials. The ancient texts described magical theory differently than modern European texts. Less rigid categorization, more emphasis on magical flow and binding. Several texts discussed techniques for anchoring magic to objects permanently. One Greek manuscript, dated approximately 200 BCE, described the division of soul essence into physical containers, thus distributing life force across multiple anchors. Such practice ensures survival beyond bodily death, as essence persists in anchored objects. However, division requires violent severance. The soul must be torn through supreme transgression, typically murder of another human. The process damages the practitioner irreparably, fracturing consciousness and diminishing capacity for human emotion. Ancient practitioners who attempted this technique inevitably descended into madness. Tom read this passage 3 times. He transcribed it completely into his official notebook, then spent an hour examining related texts for additional information. Another text, this one Roman, discussed the theoretical number of divisions possible. No more than 7 divisions appear survivable. The soul's coherence cannot withstand further fragmentation. Even 7 represents dangerous extremity. Most who attempt more than 3 divisions lose themselves entirely. Tom worked through these materials systematically, showing no unusual interest to the library staff. He requested related texts on binding magic, containment enchantments, and curse mechanics. Everything appeared consistent with someone researching authentication methodologies. The private notebook, filled each evening at his lodgings, told a different story. Tom documented specific procedures, requirements, warnings, theoretical limitations. He cross-referenced this with information from earlier research, particularly items from the Burke family journal and estate visit discussions about objects that required payment or extracted cost. The pattern was clear. Certain magical achievements required sacrifice. Power demanded price. Objects could contain portions of magic or portions of the wizard himself, if proper methodology was followed. By the end of June, Tom had filled 2 private notebooks completely. The research had provided exactly what he'd sought: methodologies, precedents, warnings, locations, networks, patterns. He returned to London the first week of July, precisely as promised. Burke reviewed his official research documentation and pronounced it thorough, potentially quite useful for resolving those disputed authentications. Tom resumed his catalogue work without incident, but the 3 months had changed everything. The stories he'd collected, from Edinburgh's family archives, from Paris's crime records, from Alexandria's ancient texts, had provided the framework he needed. Now he simply needed to act on it. The first contact occurred in November 1948, initiated through formal channels. Tom drafted a letter on Borgin and Burke's stationery, addressed to the Gringotts Department of Historical Acquisitions. The letter's stated purpose: inquiry regarding authentication services for potentially goblin-wrought items currently in shop inventory. The response arrived within 3 days. Gringotts offered consultation appointments at their auxiliary offices, smaller facilities located in Horizon Alley, separate from the main bank, used for specialized transactions requiring discretion. Available times were listed. A fee schedule was attached. Tom selected an appointment for the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock. He informed Burke, who approved the consultation as legitimate business expense. "We've got that silver serving set from the Travers estate," Burke said. "Claimed as goblin work, but no verification. And those 2 daggers from last month, similar situation. Get definitive assessments. If they're authentic, we can double the asking prices." Tom arrived at the Horizon Alley offices 15 minutes early. The building was narrow, stone-faced, unmarked except for a small bronze plaque beside the door. He entered and approached the reception desk, where a young goblin sat reviewing ledgers. "Tom Riddle, 2 o'clock appointment with authentication services." "These are..." Goblin checked his schedule book without looking up. "3rd floor. Stairs are behind that door. Knock before entering the consultation room." The 3rd floor consisted of a single hallway with 4 doors. Tom knocked at the one marked Authentication, Tuesday appointments. "Enter." The consultation room contained a large table, several chairs, and extensive lighting, both magical and natural sunlight through the skylight. A goblin stood examining something under magnification. He looked up as Tom entered. "Mr. Riddle, I'm Grackle. You're inquiring about authentication services?" "Yes. Borgin and Burke's has acquired several items claimed as goblin wrought. We need verification before sale." "Standard procedure. Show me what you've brought." Tom placed the wrapped items on the table. Grackle unwrapped each methodically. The silver serving set, the 2 daggers, and, Tom had added this without Burke's knowledge, the gaunt ring. Grackle examined the serving set first, using both visual inspection and what appeared to be magical analysis tools Tom didn't recognize. The process took perhaps 10 minutes. Then Grackle set the items aside. Goblin-made, yes. 17th century. Competent, but not exceptional work. Probably commissioned by a pure-blood family for formal entertaining. Authentic, but not particularly valuable from a historical perspective. He moved to the daggers. Similar examination process, slightly longer. 1 genuine, 1 human forgery. The genuine piece is early 18th century, ceremonial rather than practical. The forgery is perhaps 50 years old, quite good actually, but the weight balance is wrong, and the runes are decorative nonsense rather than functional inscription. Tom noted this. Can you identify the genuine dagger's original purpose? Blood magic ritual, most likely. The blade's design facilitates clean cutting with minimal pain. Important for rituals requiring voluntary sacrifice. Made for wizards, not goblins. We occasionally accepted such commissions. Grackle set the daggers aside and picked up the ring. His expression changed slightly. Not surprise exactly, but increased attention. This is interesting. Where did you acquire it? Estate sale. Documentation claimed Gaunt family origin, possibly connected to Slytherin's line. Grackle examined the ring carefully, paying particular attention to the cracked black stone. The gold work is goblin-made, very old, pre-1300 certainly, possibly earlier. High-quality craftsmanship. The stone is human addition, set much later, perhaps 16th century. And there's something else. He drew his wand and performed a detection charm Tom didn't recognize. The stone emitted a faint glow. Layered enchantments, Grackle said. Multiple workings, overlapping. One appears to be goblin ward work, protective magic, possibly bloodline verification as you suggested. But there's at least one other enchantment. Human origin. Much darker in nature. I can't fully analyze it here without more specialized tools. What would full analysis require? Grackle set the ring down carefully. Access to Gringotts' main facility, Department of Mysteries consultation, possibly curse-breaker involvement if the darker enchantment proves actively dangerous, expensive, time-consuming, and beyond the scope of standard authentication service. But the ring is genuinely old, goblin-made originally. Yes, the gold work alone confirms pre-1300 goblin craftsmanship. Whether it genuinely connects to Slytherin's bloodline requires historical verification I can't provide. But someone powerful valued this ring enough to add complex human magic to goblin foundation work. That's unusual. We typically don't permit modification of our work. Tom absorbed this. If someone wanted to learn more about historical goblin metalwork, specifically items created for notable wizarding families, would Gringotts' archives be accessible? Grackle's expression became carefully neutral. Our archives are private. Historical information is occasionally shared for legitimate scholarly or business purposes, but access requires formal application and substantial justification. What constitutes legitimate justification? That depends on what information is sought and why. Grackle paused. Gringotts maintains extensive records. Our people have crafted items for wizards for over a millennium. We know what we've made, who commissioned it, what it was designed to do. That knowledge has value. The implication was clear. Tom nodded. I appreciate the consultation. The authentication results are exactly what I needed. He paid the consultation fee, 3 galleons, and prepared to collect the items. One moment, Grackle said. The ring. You said it came from an estate sale. Yes. Is it for sale now? Tom hesitated, fractionally. Not currently. The shop is conducting further research before determining appropriate pricing. If you decide to sell, Gringotts might be interested. We occasionally repurchase significant historical pieces, particularly those involving our craftsmanship. I can facilitate an introduction to our acquisitions department if relevant. I'll keep that in mind. Tom collected the items and departed. The authentication had cost 3 galleons and provided substantial information. But the conversation had opened something more significant. A contact within Gringotts, willing to discuss historical records, someone who recognized the ring's importance, someone who might provide access to information not available through conventional channels. The second meeting occurred 3 weeks later. Tom returned to the Horizon Alley offices, this time without items for authentication. He'd sent advance correspondence, inquiry about Gringotts' historical documentation services, specifically regarding notable artifacts created for wizarding families during the medieval period. Grackle received him in the same consultation room. Your letter mentioned research interest in medieval goblin craftsmanship, Grackle said. Explain the purpose more specifically. Tom had prepared his approach carefully. Borgin and Burke's encounters items regularly whose provenance is unclear. Understanding what goblin-made artifacts existed historically, who commissioned them, and their distinctive characteristics would improve our authentication accuracy. It would also prevent us from purchasing forgeries or misrepresenting items to buyers. This benefits Gringotts how? Better authentication protects the reputation of goblin craftsmanship. Fewer forgeries in circulation means genuine goblin work maintains higher value. Additionally, if Gringotts is interested in repurchasing significant historical pieces, knowing when such items enter the market benefits your acquisitions department. Grackle considered this. What specific items are you researching? Objects connected to Hogwarts founders? Multiple items claimed as founder-associated artifacts appear regularly in estate sales. Most are likely fraudulent, but some may be genuine. Gringotts would have records if founders commissioned goblin-made items. That information is sensitive. I'm not seeking detailed specifications or current locations, simply confirmation of what existed, general descriptions, distinguishing features that would aid authentication. Grackle stood and walked to the window, looking down at Horizon Alley. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, less formal, more direct. Gringotts keeps meticulous records. We know exactly what we've made for over 1,000 years. That knowledge gives us leverage in negotiations with wizards who claim ownership of items through inheritance or conquest. If we share that knowledge freely, we lose that leverage. I understand. However, Grackle continued, Gringotts also values relationships with certain merchants who've proven reliable in past dealings. Borgin and Burke's has maintained acceptable business practices. Mr. Burke has never attempted to sell misattributed goblin work as authentic. That creates possibility for limited information exchange. Tom waited. I can provide general historical context about founder-era commissions, Grackle said. No specific locations, no current ownership information, no details that would compromise Gringotts' interests. In exchange, I'd expect notification when Borgin and Burke's encounters items matching certain descriptions. Not obligation to sell to Gringotts, simply notification that the item exists and is available for potential acquisition. That seems reasonable. Then we have basis for discussion. Grackle returned to the table. What specifically do you want to know about founder-era artifacts? Tom opened his notebook. Gryffindor's sword appears in historical records consistently. Was it goblin-made? Yes. Commissioned approximately 990 CE by Godric Gryffindor. Silver blade, goblin-wrought, ruby set, hilt. Distinctive property. The blade absorbs that which makes it stronger. It cannot be damaged through normal use and improves with each encounter with powerful magic or substances. Current location. I said no current location information. Understood. What about other Gryffindor commissions? Nothing of comparable significance. Gryffindor commissioned armor pieces and household items, but the sword was his primary significant acquisition from goblin craftsmen. Tom noted this. Hufflepuff. Helga Hufflepuff commissioned a small golden cup, approximately 1000 CE. 2 handles, badger engraving, enchanted to prevent poisoning and enhance nourishment of whatever was consumed from it. Modest magical properties compared to Gryffindor's sword, but exceptionally fine metalwork. And Ravenclaw, Slytherin. Ravenclaw commissioned nothing from goblins directly. She crafted her own items, a diadem specifically. Legend claims it enhanced wisdom, but we have no direct knowledge of its properties or current existence. And Slytherin? Grackle hesitated. Slytherin commissioned several items, a locket most notably, gold and emerald, serpent motif. Our records indicate the locket was designed with unusual specifications. Slytherin requested compartments sealed with Parseltongue-activated locks. The locket was meant to hold something valuable, something requiring that level of security. Magical properties. Protective enchantments, yes. But the locket's primary function was secure containment, not display or use. It was a safe, essentially, disguised as jewelry. Tom wrote this carefully. Any other Slytherin commissions? A ring, pre-1000 CE. Simple goldwork by our standards, but Slytherin specifically requested traditional goblin wardwork incorporation. He wanted bloodline verification. The ring would respond only to his direct descendants, warming to their touch while remaining cold to others. The gaunt ring. Tom kept his expression neutral. These items would be identifiable as genuine through their craftsmanship. Yes, goblin metalwork has distinctive qualities: weight balance, magical conductivity, resistance to corrosion. Knowledgeable buyers recognize it. Forgers can approximate appearance, but rarely duplicate these functional properties. The conversation continued for another hour. Grackle provided information about medieval commission practices, authentication methodologies, and historical tracking of notable items. He avoided specifics about current locations, but confirmed which founder artifacts were genuinely goblin-made versus wizard-crafted. When Tom finally departed, he had spent 5 galleons for the consultation, Grackle's fee for historical research services, but had acquired substantial confirmed information about founder artifacts' existence, properties, and distinguishing features. More importantly, he'd established a working relationship with a goblin who had access to extensive historical records and was willing to trade information under appropriate circumstances. The third meeting occurred in February 1949, this time at a neutral location, a tea room in Horizont Alley that served both wizard and goblin clientele. Grackle had suggested it. Fewer questions about regular meetings if they occur somewhere without official connection to either of our institutions. Tom arrived at the designated time. Grackle sat at a corner table, already reviewing documents. "You've been making inquiries," Grackle said without preamble. Other goblins have mentioned a young wizard asking detailed questions about ward-breaking techniques and vault security. Tom sat. "I've consulted several independent metalworkers about authentication issues. Careful. Goblins talk to each other. Too many questions about security makes people suspicious about your intentions." Noted. Grackle set aside his documents. "What are you actually trying to accomplish?" Tom considered his response. Directness seemed appropriate. Goblins respected clear dealing. "I'm locating specific historical artifacts. Authentication knowledge helps identify which items are genuine versus forgery. Understanding security helps determine whether recovery of lost items is feasible. Recovery from whom? Wizarding families who possess items through inheritance or acquisition, often unaware of the item's significance or proper history." Grackle studied him. "You're planning to steal." "I'm planning to recover historically significant items from people who don't understand their importance." Semantics. Gringotts can't be associated with theft, regardless of how you frame it philosophically. "I'm not asking for association. I'm asking for information, which you've already been providing for compensation. What I do with that information is separate from our arrangement." Grackle was silent for a moment. Then, "What specifically do you need?" "Vault ward configurations. How Gringotts protects high security, deposits. Not specific vault information. General methodologies, physical barriers, magical protections, alarm systems, curse triggers. That information could be used against Gringotts." "I'm not targeting Gringotts vaults. I need to understand comparable security used by wealthy families for private storage. Pure blood estates often employ similar methodologies to Gringotts, sometimes hiring goblin ward crafters directly. Understanding how those systems work informs my approach. Crackle considered this. The information you're seeking is valuable, more valuable than what you've paid so far. Name your price. 15 galleons. An agreement that if you encounter specific items in your recovery efforts, you'll offer Gringotts first opportunity to purchase before approaching other buyers. Which items? Anything made by goblins that predates 1100 CE. Those have historical significance beyond their monetary value. We prefer to know their locations. Tom calculated quickly. The Hufflepuff Cup and Slytherin locket both qualified. But agreement to offer first opportunity didn't require acceptance of Gringotts' offer or preclude other eventual disposition. Agreed. Crackle drew a notebook from his robes. Standard ward configuration for high-value storage. He began explaining systematically physical barriers, thickness, materials, anti-tunneling enchantments, magical protections, detection charms, intrusion alerts, curse triggers activated by unauthorized access, alarm systems, local versus remote notification, response protocols. Tom took notes carefully. The information was detailed, technical, exactly what he needed. Private estates typically use simplified versions. Crackle continued. Fewer curse layers, less sophisticated detection, slower response time. Wealthy families hire goblin ward crafters for initial installation, but rarely maintain proper updates. Wards degrade over years without maintenance. Detection sensitivity decreases, curse triggers deteriorate, alarm connections fail. How would someone determine ward age and condition? Magical signature analysis. Old wards have distinctive resonance patterns. Detection charms can identify installation date within a few decades. Condition assessment requires proximity examination, walking the ward perimeter, testing response to minor magical probing. Tom noted this. And if someone wanted to bypass rather than break wards? Different approach entirely. Breaking triggers alarms. Bypassing requires understanding the ward's logic, how it distinguishes authorized from unauthorized access. Many wards key to bloodline, specific individuals, or physical tokens. Finding the authentication key allows passage without triggering protection. Examples? Crackle provided them. Bloodline wards requiring descendants' presence, token wards requiring specific objects, password wards requiring verbal or magical phrases. Each had vulnerabilities if the underlying logic could be identified. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Tom filled half a notebook with technical information about security methodologies, vulnerabilities, bypass techniques. When they concluded, Tom paid the 15 galleons without hesitation. The information was worth substantially more than the price. One final question, Tom said, as they prepared to depart. Gryffindor's sword. You mentioned it absorbs what makes it stronger. What happens to items it absorbs? They're incorporated into the blade's magical essence. The sword becomes permanently enhanced by the encounter. Why? Theoretical interest. If the sword absorbed, say, basilisk venom, one of the few substances that can destroy powerful magical protections, would that enhancement be permanent? Crackle's eyes narrowed slightly. Theoretically, yes. The blade would retain basilisk venom's magical properties indefinitely. But basilisks are rare, dangerous, and typically inaccessible to casual encounter. Of course, simply curious about the mechanism. They parted outside the tea room. Tom returned to his lodgings and spent the evening transcribing his notes into both official and private notebooks. The Goblin negotiations had provided exactly what he needed: confirmed artifact specifications, security methodology, bypass techniques, and a contact willing to trade information for compensation. The pattern was consistent across all his research. Information was available to those who knew how to ask, who could offer appropriate compensation, who understood what they needed and why. Tom now understood both what existed and how to acquire it. The question was no longer whether he could locate and obtain the objects he sought. The question was simply when to begin. The letter to Armando Dippet was composed with particular care. Tom drafted 3 versions before settling on the final text, written on quality parchment with formal business letterhead created specifically for this purpose. T.M. Riddle, Historical Research Consultant, London. The letter proposed a modest donation to Hogwarts for library acquisitions, funded through Tom's professional work, accompanied by request for brief meeting with the headmaster to discuss historical preservation of Founder-era artifacts and institutional memory. The tone was respectful, the donation amount significant but not suspicious, 50 galleons, and the request carefully framed as scholarly interest rather than personal agenda. Dippet's response arrived within a week. The donation was gratefully accepted. An appointment was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late April 1952, when castle activity would be minimal due to exam preparation schedules. Tom travelled to Hogsmeade by flue, then walked the familiar path to Hogwarts. Spring weather had turned the grounds green. Students studied near the lake, visible in the distance as Tom approached the main entrance. The castle felt unchanged. Same stone corridors, same moving staircases, same portraits lining the walls. Several recognized him as he passed. "Young Riddle," called a wizard in 16th century robes from a frame on the 3rd floor. "Haven't seen you in years. What brings you back?" "Meeting with the headmaster." "Ah, professional visit then. You've done well for yourself, I hear." Tom continued without further conversation. The portraits watched his progress with varying degrees of interest, some merely curious, others clearly remembering him from his student years. The gargoyle guardian at the headmaster's office staircase accepted the password Dippet had provided. Acid pops. Tom ascended the spiral stairs and knocked. "Enter." Dippet's office remained as Tom remembered. Circular room, portraits of previous headmasters, various instruments displaying information about castle status, Fawkes on his perch near the window. Dippet himself sat behind the desk, looking perhaps slightly older but fundamentally unchanged. "Mr. Riddle." Punctual, as always. Dippet gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I received your generous donation. The library staff is already planning acquisitions. Most appreciated. I'm glad to contribute to the institution that provided my education. Your letter mentioned interest in Founder-era artifacts and preservation. Elaborate, please." Tom had prepared this explanation carefully. "My work involves authenticating historical objects. I've encountered increasing numbers of items claimed as Founder-associated, some genuine, most fraudulent. I'm researching authentication methodologies and wondered if Hogwarts maintains historical records that might provide comparative information. The castle archives are extensive but not generally accessible to outside researchers. I understand. I'm not requesting archive access specifically. Rather, I hope to consult with those who possess institutional memory, portraits, particularly former headmasters, who might remember historical discussions about founder artifacts or early castle security arrangements. Dippet considered this. The portraits are protective of certain information. They won't share details that might compromise castle security. Of course not. I'm interested in historical context, not current security specifications. Understanding what artifacts existed originally, their purposes, their general characteristics. That seems reasonable. Dippet glanced at the portrait walls. Several former headmasters were present in their frames, listening with obvious interest. Portraits. Would any of you be willing to discuss historical matters with Mr. Riddle? A wizard in medieval robes spoke first. Everard, according to the nameplate. What specifically interests you, young man? Founder-era magical practices. How the founders approached permanent enchantment. What objects they considered significant. How they protected important items. Another portrait, a witch named Dilys Derwent, said, broad questions. Narrow. Them. Tom nodded. Did the founders create objects specifically to preserve their magical legacy beyond their lifetimes? Obviously, Everard said. Gryffindor's sword, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket, all designed with lasting enchantments, all representing their maker's values and capabilities. Are all 4 items' locations currently known? The portraits exchanged glances. Dippet interceded. Mr. Riddle, I don't think the cup and sword are known, Dilys said. The diadem and locket, their locations are uncertain. The diadem, particularly, lost for centuries, possibly destroyed. What were the diadem's properties? Enhanced the wearer's wisdom, supposedly. Rowena valued intellect above all else. She crafted the diadem to amplify cognitive abilities, clearer thinking, better memory, improved analytical capacity. Tom noted this mentally. And the locket? The portrait seemed less willing to discuss this. Finally, a portrait Tom didn't recognize spoke, a severe-looking wizard from perhaps the 1600s. Slytherin's locket was complicated, officially a symbol of his house and bloodline, practically a container. Slytherin believed in preservation of magical essence. The locket was designed with that purpose, to hold and protect something of value. Magical objects, documents, possibly. Slytherin never fully explained his intentions to the other founders. By the time he departed Hogwarts, relationships had deteriorated significantly. He took the locket with him. Tom shifted approach. The Chamber of Secrets. Historical records confirm its existence? Dippet looked uncomfortable. Mr. Riddle, that's somewhat beyond. The chamber exists, Everard interrupted. Slytherin constructed it during his tenure here, a personal project kept secret from the other founders until near his departure. Its exact location and purpose remain disputed, but it's within the castle. Presumably, Slytherin had extensive knowledge of castle architecture. He helped design portions of the dungeons and underground spaces. The chamber is hidden somewhere in those areas, protected by enchantments keyed to his bloodline. Parseltongue access? The portraits fell silent. Finally, Dilys said, That's the theory. Only Slytherin's heirs, who inherited his Parseltongue ability, could open the chamber. Whether this is true, We can't confirm. No verified heir has come forward in centuries. Tom allowed a pause before continuing. The castle's protective enchantments. How do they distinguish between authorized and unauthorized access to restricted areas? That's touching on security matters, Dippet said firmly. I don't think we should discuss that in detail. I'm asking historically. Did the founders install location-based protections, or were restrictions added later by subsequent administrations? Everard answered, both. The founders installed foundational protections, wards against hostile magic, detection charms for dangerous creatures, basic access restrictions for certain areas. Later headmasters added layers. Current security is accumulated work of 1,000 years. Are founder-level enchantments distinguishable from later additions? Sometimes. Founder magic has distinctive qualities, greater permanence, more sophisticated logic, deeper integration with castle infrastructure. Later additions, while competent, lack that fundamental integration. The conversation continued for another hour. Tom asked carefully structured questions about castle history, founder practices, early enchantment methodologies. The portraits responded with varying degrees of specificity. Some questions received detailed answers, others were deflected or refused. Throughout, Tom maintained the role of serious scholar, respectful, intellectually curious, appropriately grateful for information shared. Nothing suggested ulterior purpose beyond legitimate historical research. When the meeting concluded, Dippet walked Tom to the office door. If you require further consultation, ride ahead. The portraits enjoyed the discussion. They appreciate knowledgeable inquiry. Thank you, Headmaster. This has been extremely valuable. Tom descended the spiral staircase and began walking toward the castle exit. But instead of leaving directly, he took a longer route, through corridors he'd memorized during his student years, past portraits he'd cultivated relationships with previously. On the 5th floor, he paused before a portrait of a witch in Tudor-era dress. Good afternoon, Magdalena. The portrait smiled. Tom Riddle. Haven't spoken with you properly in years. Still poking around castle history. Always. I'm particularly interested in early castle construction, where the founders' personal chambers were located, which areas they used for private work. Curious choice of research. Why does that matter now? Authentication work. Understanding how founders organize their personal spaces helps identify objects genuinely connected to them versus later inventions. Magdalena considered this. Slytherin kept chambers in the dungeons, naturally. Deepest levels, near where the current Slytherin common room sits, but further down. He worked extensively with serpent motifs in his personal architecture, snake imagery everywhere, parcel tongue activated doors. Do those chambers still exist? Parts of them. The castle's been remodeled extensively, but foundational spaces rarely get completely removed. Too difficult to demolish founder-level construction. Slytherin's deeper chambers are probably still there, just sealed off or hidden behind later walls. Tom chatted with Magdalena for several more minutes, gradually extracting additional details about dungeon layout, founder-era architecture, areas of the castle that had remained largely unchanged. Then he continued his route, stopping at 3 more portraits, each conversation apparently casual, each yielding specific information about different castle areas or historical details. By the time Tom reached the entrance hall, he'd gathered substantial intelligence, confirmation that the Chamber of Secrets existed and was likely in the deeper dungeons. Details about parcel tongue-based security, information about which castle areas retained founder-level enchantments, and general understanding of portrait network communication patterns. He left Hogwarts as afternoon light stretched across the grounds, appearing to any observer as simply another former student who'd visited professionally and departed normally. The second visit occurred in June, using different pretext. Tom wrote to Professor Slughorn, who he'd maintained occasional correspondence with since graduation, requesting advice about a potential career transition into education. The letter mentioned Tom's current work, but suggested growing interest in sharing knowledge with younger generations. Slughorn responded enthusiastically. Of course, Tom should visit, discuss teaching possibilities, perhaps observe some classes to determine if the profession suited him. Tom arrived on a Wednesday morning, during regular term time. The castle was fully active, students in classes, corridors busy between periods, staff occupied with teaching responsibilities. Slughorn received him warmly. "Tom, excellent to see you. You're looking well. Borgin and Burke's treating you properly? The work is educational, but I'm considering whether my skills might serve better in an academic context. Teaching is tremendously rewarding, though the pay isn't what you're earning in private commerce, I suspect." They discussed teaching requirements, position availability, application processes. Slughorn offered to show Tom several classes. "See how we manage the younger students these days. Observe different teaching approaches." Tom accepted. They spent the morning visiting classes. Transfiguration with Dumbledore, Charms with Professor Flitwick, a defense against the dark arts lesson with the current instructor. Tom played the role of interested potential educator, asking appropriate questions about curriculum and pedagogy. But between classes, walking through corridors, Tom studied the castle systematically. He noted changes since his student years, new portraits in certain locations, modified traffic patterns, areas that had been accessible as a student, now showing restricted access. During lunch in the staff room, conversation turned to castle maintenance and administration. Tom asked careful questions about how facilities management worked, who handled repairs and modifications, what areas required regular attention. "The house elves manage most maintenance," Slughorn explained. "Brilliant workers, very efficient, though some areas are beyond their capabilities. Founder-level enchantments require specialist attention periodically." "Which areas specifically?" "Oh, the Chamber of Secrets, naturally, though that's sealed, and portions of the dungeons where original construction remains, the Room of Requirement sometimes, areas where founder magic is still active." Tom filed this information carefully. After lunch, Slughorn returned to afternoon classes. Tom was given permission to explore the castle. "Reacquaint yourself with the place. See if it feels like somewhere you'd want to work." Tom explored methodically. He visited the library, spending time in the restricted section, ostensibly researching historical teaching methodologies, but actually reviewing texts on castle architecture and founder history. He walked the dungeons extensively, mapping layouts, identifying sections that corresponded to his earlier portrait conversations about Slytherin's chambers. In the entrance hall, he paused before a portrait of a medieval knight. "Excuse me, I'm researching castle history for educational purposes. Would you know anything about Slytherin's departure from Hogwarts? Specifically, what areas of the castle he sealed before leaving? The knight considered. Sealed his personal quarters, certainly, and the chamber. Locked it behind Parseltongue protections. There were rumors he left other protections in place, guardians of some kind, but those were never confirmed. Guardians? Creatures, possibly. Slytherin was known for serpent affinity. Some believed he left a great serpent in the chamber as ultimate protection, but no one's verified that. The chamber's been sealed for 9 centuries. Tom thanked the portrait and continued his exploration. By late afternoon, when he departed Hogwarts after thanking Slughorn for the visit, he had gathered comprehensive information about current castle security, maintained relationships with potentially useful portraits, and confirmed several key details about chamber location and access. The third visit occurred in September, framed as follow-up to the teaching inquiry. Tom wrote to Dippet directly, indicating that after observation and consideration, he remained very interested in eventual educational work, but needed a few more years of professional development first. He requested permission for occasional visits to maintain connection with the institution and stay current on educational developments. Dippet approved this readily. Always pleased to see former students considering teaching careers. Visit whenever your schedule permits. Just provide advance notice. Tom established a pattern. Visits every 4 to 6 weeks, usually on weekends when student activity was lower. Each visit had legitimate surface purpose. Observing teaching methods, consulting with staff about curriculum, researching educational history in the library. Each visit also served other purposes. Tom systematically cultivated portraits throughout the castle, building relationships, gathering information, mapping the informal communication network that connected frames across different locations. He learned which portraits were most talkative, which most knowledgeable about specific castle areas, which most willing to share historical details. He discovered that portraits near the Slytherin common room remembered student conversations from decades past, including discussions about the chamber. He identified which portraits had been present during various headmaster administrations, and thus knew about security modifications over time. The portrait network was extensive. Hundreds of frames, thousands of painted figures who could move between portraits, communicate across the castle, observe and remember everything they witnessed. And portraits enjoyed conversation. They grew bored in their frames, appreciated intellectual engagement, valued being treated as knowledgeable sources rather than mere decoration. Tom provided that engagement systematically. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered previous conversations, showed genuine interest in their knowledge and observations. He never asked anything that seemed immediately suspicious, never pushed when portraits showed reluctance, never revealed his actual purposes. Over months of visits, portraits began volunteering information without prompting. They'd call to him when he passed. "Tom, I remembered something about that architectural question you asked." Or, "I was talking with Bartholomew's portrait in the dungeons, and he mentioned something you might find interesting." The accumulated information was substantial, detailed knowledge of castle layout, historical context about founder-era construction, specific information about sealed areas and restricted spaces, understanding of how castle protections functioned and communicated. By December, Tom had made 8 visits total. His presence had become familiar enough the staff barely noticed when he arrived. Students assumed he was a visiting educator. Portraits greeted him as regular acquaintance. And Tom had extracted nearly everything the castle's institutional memory could provide about Slytherin's presence at Hogwarts, the chamber's existence and security, and the artifacts the founders had created to preserve their legacies. The pattern was consistent with all his previous research. Approach systematically, provide appropriate context, build relationships over time, extract information gradually without triggering suspicion. The castle had given him its secrets willingly, never realizing it was being systematically catalogued by someone with entirely different purposes than the ones he claimed. The first murder was not impulsive. Tom had prepared methodically, locations scouted in advance, timing calculated based on routine observation, disposal planned with attention to magical trace elimination. The Riddle family home in Little Hangleton stood isolated, visited infrequently by locals, and the 3 occupants maintained predictable schedules. Tom travelled to the village on a Tuesday evening in August 1954. He approached the house after dark, using disillusionment charms rather than full invisibility, sufficient for avoiding casual observation, less detectable than more powerful concealment. The door locks yielded to silent unlocking charms learned years ago at Hogwarts. Inside, the house was quiet. Tom moved through familiar spaces. He'd visited once before, years earlier, confirming locations and layouts. The family sat in the dining room. Tom Riddle Sr., Thomas Riddle, Mary Riddle. All 3 looked up as Tom entered, wands already drawn from preparation. The curses were quick, efficient, leaving no marks beyond the empty eyes that signified Avada Kedavra. Tom arranged the bodies carefully, positioned as though death had occurred during evening meal, no evidence of struggle or forced entry. He eliminated his magical traces methodically, cleaning charms on surfaces he'd touched, obscuration spells over any residual magical signature, careful erasure of his presence. The entire process took 17 minutes. Tom departed the same way he'd entered, reapplied disillusionment charms, and walked to the village boundary before apparating back to London. The next morning, a maid discovered the bodies. Local Muggle police found no explanation. 3 apparently healthy people, dead without cause, no signs of violence or poisoning. The Muggle newspapers reported it as tragic mystery. The wizarding world barely noticed. 3 Muggles dead in a remote village warranted no ministry investigation, particularly when no magical traces were found at the scene. Tom returned to work at Borgin and Burke's without incident. The ring came next. Tom had kept it since the authentication consultation with Grackle, stored initially at the shop but later moved to his personal lodgings when Burke showed no particular interest in selling it. The layered enchantments Grackle had identified required investigation beyond goblin expertise. Tom worked in his room at night, using detection methods learned from library research and goblin consultations. The protective magic was identifiable. Bloodline verification, as expected, keyed to Slytherin's descendants. But the darker enchantment beneath proved more complex. After 3 weeks of careful analysis, Tom identified it, a containment curse designed to trap something within the ring structure. The curse was old, perhaps added centuries after the ring's original crafting, and showed characteristics consistent with soul-based magic described in the Alexandria texts. Someone had used the ring as an anchor. Someone had already attempted what Tom now planned. The knowledge was instructive. The curse's structure showed how soul division could be bound to physical objects, but it also revealed deterioration. The enchantment had degraded over centuries, the contained essence weakening until barely detectable. Tom needed better methodology, more stable binding. The Alexandria texts had mentioned requirements: supreme transgression to fracture the soul, careful ritual work to separate and anchor the fragment, object selection important for symbolic and practical reasons. He had the transgression now, the Riddle murders. He had the ritual knowledge from months of library research. He needed the right moment, the right preparation. The work took place over a September weekend in his lodgings. Tom set protective wards on the room, arranged the necessary materials, the ring, ritual components, reference texts. The process was precise, requiring exact phrasing and controlled magic. The sensation was distinctive, a tearing feeling, internal and fundamental, as though something essential was being separated forcibly. Pain was significant but manageable. The ritual directed the separated fragment into the ring, binding it with the enchantments Tom had prepared. When finished, Tom felt different. Not diminished exactly, but altered. Something had been removed and relocated. The ring now pulsed with active dark magic, far stronger than the degraded curse it had contained previously. Tom sealed it in a protective box and set it aside. The process had worked. The methodology was proven, and he now understood both the capability and the cost involved. The pattern of visits changed through autumn. Tom returned to sites he'd researched previously, but his approach was different, more direct, less concerned with maintaining elaborate pretense. The Yaxley estate in October. Octavia Yaxley had died the previous spring, and the property stood empty pending inheritance resolution. Tom entered through disabled wards. His goblin-learned techniques worked exactly as explained, and moved through the house systematically. The crystal sphere was still in the drawing room, where he'd seen it years before. Tom took it without ceremony, also collecting 3 books from the library that discussed divination mechanics and several documents from the family archives relating to Slytherin artifact locations. No one witnessed the intrusion. The house's protections didn't trigger. Tom had bypassed rather than broken them. He departed before dawn, taking items that wouldn't be missed for months or discovered missing even then given the estate's administrative complications. The Selwyn property in November. Marcus Selwyn had entered St. Mungo's long-term care, and the house sat unoccupied. Tom accessed the library and removed specific correspondence files, the Grindelwald family letters particularly, plus additional documents about Deathly Hallows' historical tracking. Again, no complications. The items taken were archival materials unlikely to be reviewed during estate processing. Even if their absence was eventually noticed, determining when they disappeared would be impossible. The Burke estate in December, technically Tom's own inheritance, Ryder's distant family member, though he'd declined formal claim. He returned for items he'd noted during the original visit, but hadn't removed. The journal documenting collector networks, several pieces of authenticated ancient magical tools, and the vial of preserved blood he'd previously dismissed as valueless, but now recognized as potentially useful for ritual work. Each visit followed similar pattern: entrance through security. He understood thoroughly from goblin consultation, selective removal of specific items, careful trace elimination, departure without witness. Tom's knowledge of wards, protective enchantments, and detection avoidance had become comprehensive through years of systematic research. The transition from cautious information gathering to active acquisition was deliberate. Tom had spent years learning locations, security measures, access methods. Now he was implementing that knowledge systematically, recovering items efficiently while maintaining minimal exposure risk. Mrs. Hepzibah Smith received Tom in her drawing room on a Thursday afternoon in February 1955. She'd contacted Borgin and Burke's about selling additional items, some jewelry, a few decorative pieces, nothing significant, and specifically requested Tom conduct the evaluation. "You were so professional during the previous visit," she'd written to Burke. "I'd prefer working with him again." Tom arrived at the appointed time. Hokey the house elf admitted him, and Mrs. Smith greeted him warmly. "Mr. Riddle, thank you for coming. I've gathered several items. They're in the side room. But first, would you like tea?" "Thank you. No, I'm quite eager to see what you've selected." They moved to the side room. The items were laid out on a table: Victorian-era jewelry, some silver candlesticks, a set of decorative plates. Tom examined each methodically, providing valuations while maintaining professional demeanor. "These are lovely pieces," he said. "The jewelry particularly should find buyers quickly. I can offer—" He named figures for each category. Mrs. Smith negotiated mildly, and they reached agreement. "Excellent," she said. "Now, since you're here, would you like to see my special pieces again? I know you were interested during your last visit. The founder artifacts?" "Yes. I've been researching their history myself recently. Fascinating provenance." She moved to the prominent cabinet and opened it carefully. The cup and locket sat where Tom remembered, displayed on velvet cloth. Mrs. Smith lifted the cup reverently. Helga Hufflepuff's personal cup. Can you imagine? 1,000 years old, still perfect. The enchantments preserve it completely. She held it toward Tom. "Would you like to examine it more closely?" Tom accepted the cup. Heavy, solid gold, beautiful craftsmanship. The badger engraving was precise. The handles balanced perfectly. He could feel the magic in it. Protective enchantments, enhancement properties, exactly as Grackle had described. "Remarkable," Tom said truthfully. "And the locket." Mrs. Smith set down the cup and lifted the locket. "Salazar, Slytherin's own work. Look at the serpent detail. Exquisite." She opened it. Inside, a space large enough for a small photograph or perhaps a lock of hair. The locket was designed exactly as Tom's research had indicated, a container with parcel tongue activated protections, meant to hold something valuable. "Beautiful," Tom said. "You're fortunate to possess such items." "Oh, I know. I'll never sell them. They're staying with me until I die, then going to the ministry per my will. Too historically important for private ownership." They returned to the drawing room. Tom completed the transaction for the offered items, arranging for their collection. Mrs. Smith walked him to the door, Hokey following silently. "Thank you again for coming personally," Mrs. Smith said. "You're always so thorough and professional." "My pleasure, Mrs. Smith." Tom departed, carrying documentation for the purchased items. That evening, He opened his private notebook and wrote, "Smith Residence, security. Minimal, house elf only protection. Cup and locket confirmed in drawing room cabinet. Access feasible. Timing requires calculation." The transition point had arrived. Years of research had identified the objects. Months of consultation had provided methodologies. Weeks of practice had proven capabilities. Now it was simply a matter of execution. The visit occurred on a Saturday evening in March. Tom returned to Mrs. Smith's residence using different approach. Side entrance, disillusionment rather than formal arrival. The security was exactly as assessed. Basic locking charms, no ward system, reliance on physical isolation, and house elf vigilance. Hoki was occupied in the kitchen. Tom moved through the house silently, reaching the drawing room without encounter. The cabinet opened to a simple unlocking charm. Mrs. Smith's confidence in her security had been misplaced. Tom took both items, the cup and the locket. Then he turned and found Hoki standing in the doorway, eyes wide. "Sir, in stealing from mistress." The curse was immediate, silent, leaving Hoki collapsed on the floor. Tom modified the house elf's memory quickly, erased the past 10 minutes, implanted confusion and disorientation. Then he moved to Mrs. Smith's bedroom. She was preparing for sleep, not expecting visitors. The curse caught her completely unaware. Tom arranged the scene carefully. Mrs. Smith appeared to have died naturally in her chair. Heart failure, perhaps. Nothing suspicious. Hoki would be found confused and unable to explain the evening clearly. House elf testimony was frequently dismissed as unreliable anyway. The cup and locket went into Tom's bag, wrapped carefully in protective cloth. He departed the same way he'd entered, eliminating traces systematically. By midnight, he was back in his London lodgings, examining the artifacts properly for the first time. The Hufflepuff cup would serve his purposes perfectly. Significant historical object. Founder connection. Appropriate, symbolic value. The locket was ideal for similar reasons, with the added benefit of Slytherin association. Tom set them aside and opened his notebook. He began calculating. 2 murders tonight. 2 more objects available for the ritual work he'd proven successful with the ring. The methodology was established. The objects were acquired. The research phase had concluded. What remained was simply implementation. And Tom had always excelled at systematic implementation of carefully prepared plans. The stories he'd collected over 9 years had provided everything necessary. Now he would use that knowledge to transform himself into something beyond the limitations those stories had tried to warn against. The warnings, after all, were only relevant if one cared about the costs involved. Tom had long since decided those costs were acceptable. The employment termination notice arrived at Borgin and Burke's on the morning of Monday, 12th of March 1956. A formal letter on standard parchment, delivered by post, rather than personal presentation. The text was brief. "Please accept this notification of my resignation from Borgin and Burke's, effective immediately. Personal circumstances require my departure from current employment. All outstanding catalogue work has been completed and filed appropriately. Keys and shop materials are enclosed. Thank you for the professional opportunities provided during my tenure. T.M. Riddle." Burke read it twice, then checked the envelope. The shop keys were indeed enclosed, along with Tom's identification documents and his most recent ledger entries, all properly completed showing work current through the previous Friday. Peculiar, Burke muttered. No advance notice, no explanation. He filed the letter in the employment records cabinet and posted an advertisement for a replacement associate. The shop's operations continued without significant disruption. Tom had maintained his catalogue work meticulously, leaving no incomplete documentation or unresolved authentication issues. Within a week, Burke had largely forgotten the abrupt departure. Junior associates left regularly, typically for better opportunities or personal reasons they didn't elaborate. The work was demanding, the pay modest, the subject matter often disturbing. High turnover was standard. The shop's business continued normally through spring and into summer. The Edinburgh Library received similar notification. Mrs. Kilpatrick opened the letter during her morning mail review in April. Due to changed circumstances, I'm discontinuing my research access at the Edinburgh Magical Research Library. All borrowed materials have been returned and my reading room access surrendered. Thank you for accommodating my research needs. T.M. Riddle. Mrs. Kilpatrick checked the restricted section logs. Tom's last visit was recorded as 15th of February, over 2 months prior. No outstanding materials, no unreturned documents, no damage reports. She filed the letter and removed his name from the approved researchers list. The reading room key he'd mentioned returning was indeed in the deposit box, with a note dated 15th of February. Everything properly concluded. No irregularities noted. The Paris Bibliothèque received no formal notification. Tom's research access simply lapsed when he failed to renew his credentials for the 1956 calendar year. The librarian Dubois noted the expiration during routine administrative review in May and transferred Tom's file to inactive status. Standard procedure for researchers who completed their work and departed without ceremony. Alexandria received nothing at all. Tom's authorized access period had concluded in June 1948, and he'd never applied for extension. Dr. Hassan mentioned him occasionally when discussing conscientious researchers, that young British fellow who studied ancient binding magic, very thorough, excellent documentation practices. But otherwise, Tom's presence at the library left no administrative trace beyond filed paperwork and completed access logs. The pattern repeated across Tom's various activities. The modest lodgings he'd rented in London since 1945 were vacated in March, the landlord receiving standard notice and final month's rent. No forwarding address provided, no explanation offered. The rooms were cleaned out completely, no personal items left behind, no indication of the occupant's destination or future plans. The Horizon Alley offices where Tom had met with Grackle noted his absence when he failed to appear for a scheduled consultation in April. Grackle waited 15 minutes, then marked the appointment as cancelled. No follow-up contact arrived. The Goblin filed his notes on their previous discussions and moved on to other clients. Standard business interruption. Wizards discontinued consultations regularly. Projects completed. Interests changed. Circumstances altered. Grackle thought nothing of it initially. Only later, when rumours began circulating about missing artifacts and unusual security breaches at several pure-blood estates, did Grackle review his notes more carefully. The questions Tom had asked about ward configurations, bypass techniques, authentication of founder artifacts acquired different significance in retrospect. But by then, Tom Riddle had been untraceable for months. Hogwarts noticed somewhat differently. The portraits, accustomed to Tom's regular visits through late 1955, remarked on his absence when spring 1956 arrived without his customary appearance. "Haven't seen young Riddle in months," one portrait mentioned to another in April. Perhaps his teaching interest diminished. He never formally applied for positions. Pity. He asked excellent questions, quite knowledgeable about castle history. The portraits discussed this occasionally, but without particular concern. Former students visited irregularly. Tom had never committed to a specific schedule. His absence was notable, but not alarming. Armando Dippet, when the subject arose during casual staff conversation, simply noted, "Mr. Riddle sent a letter in February indicating his plans had changed. Very polite about it, thanked us for accommodating his visits, said he was pursuing opportunities that would prevent regular castle access." No one questioned this further. The castle had hundreds of former students, many of whom maintained periodic contact before eventually discontinuing visits as life circumstances evolved. Tom Riddle's departure from Hogwarts orbit seemed entirely unremarkable. But in other circles, different patterns emerged. The first whispers appeared in June, circulating through Nocturne Alley's darker establishments. A wizard of considerable power had been asking questions, specific questions about curse work, forbidden magic, practitioners willing to discuss techniques the ministry had banned decades ago. The wizard called himself Lord Voldemort. No one knew his origin initially. He appeared in private meetings, spoke with absolute authority, demonstrated capabilities that exceeded most dark wizards' expertise. He asked about Horcruxes, a term few recognized, fewer still understood. He inquired about locations of powerful magical objects, protective enchantments used by ancient wizards, methods for consolidating power through fear rather than political process. Those who met with him reported similar impressions. Young, perhaps 30, extraordinarily knowledgeable, completely without conscience or hesitation about magical practices others considered too dangerous, even for criminal application. By August, the name Voldemort had spread through dark wizard networks across Britain. Someone new had arrived, someone who understood magic at levels most practitioners never achieved, someone building something, organization, movement, power base, with systematic methodology that suggested long preparation. The ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement began receiving reports in September. Minor incidents initially. Dark magic usage in locations previously quiet. Known dark wizards gathering in coordinated groups rather than operating individually. References to a lord who commanded respect and obedience. The reports were filed, investigated with routine priority. Dark wizard activity fluctuated regularly. This seemed like standard criminal behavior, perhaps slightly more organized than typical, but not immediately alarming. No one connected Voldemort with Tom Riddle, because no one had reason to make that connection. Tom Riddle was a former Hogwarts student, honor recipient, employed at respectable antiquarian shop, researcher who'd visited multiple libraries pursuing scholarly interests. His disappearance from those contexts warranted no particular investigation. Adults relocated regularly, changed careers, moved without notification. Only gradually, as 1956 progressed into 1957, did the scope of change become apparent. Burke, noticed first, among those who'd known Tom directly,